Hello and welcome to the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith. Today, we're revisiting some familiar topics that our longstanding listeners will recognize as we explore the question, did God temporarily forget Noah? Genesis 8:1 raises this intriguing question, and we'll examine how open theism might interpret this verse. Did God have a senior moment and forget about those on the ark? According to open theists, it's possible. We'll also revisit our discussion on anthropomorphism to see if it helps us understand this passage. And finally, we'll delve into the Hebrew word zakar to uncover its deeper meaning. So stay tuned as we dive into these thought-provoking topics. As usual, I will present a number of different opinions from my research and conclude with my own thoughts. Show notes will include links to all we discuss. Are you ready to dive in? All right, let's learn together. Genesis 8:1 from the New Living Translation. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and livestock with him in the boat. He sent a wind to blow across the earth, and the floodwaters began to recede. Now, the problem, as defined by the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, is this. The fact that the text says that God remembered Noah seems to imply that he temporarily forgot him. Yet, the Bible declares that God knows all things, as we find in verses in Psalms, Jeremiah, and Hebrews, and that he never forgets his saints, that's Isaiah 49:15. How then could he temporarily forget Noah? Now, the solution from the Big Book of Bible Difficulties is this. In his omniscience, God was always aware of Noah being in the ark. However, after Noah was left in the ark for over a year, as if he were forgotten, God gave a token of his remembrance and brought Noah and his family out of it. But God had never forgotten Noah, since it was he that warned Noah in the very beginning in order to save him and the human race. And this is Genesis 6:8-13. We often use a similar expression when we remember someone on their birthday, even though we had never forgotten they existed. So, with that explanation from the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, we might wonder, is it still possible that God could have forgotten about Noah? According to open theists, it's not only possible, but it's likely. This debate centers on the concept of immutability. Now, what does immutability mean? In theological terms, immutability refers to the idea that God does not change. However, open theists challenge this notion, believing that God does indeed change and is not immutable. This perspective significantly impacts how they interpret passages like Genesis 8:1. Let's dive into the framework of the open theist argument. Sean Nelson, in his December 2019 article, Does God Change? Responding to Open Theism, provides a detailed explanation. He notes that some today reject the doctrine of immutability and other related classical attributes of God. These individuals are known as open theists or neo-theists. Nelson references Clark Pinnock's groundbreaking work, The Openness of God, which summarizes the position of open theism. According to this view, God changes, takes risks, repents, suffers, opens himself up to the possibility of failure and disappointment, learns, and comes to know events as they happen. Open theists believe that God adapts to surprises and the unexpected, enters into dynamic, give-and-take relationships with us, experiences time as we do, occasionally changes his mind, and adjusts or alters his plans. If plan A fails, God is ready with plan B. All right, Sean Nelson's summary clearly outlines how open theists depict God as completely changeable, challenging the traditional view of God's immutability. Now, continuing this line of thought, let's consider R. Scott Clark's perspective from his April 2nd, 2014 article, Does God Change? Clark explains that, according to proponents of open theism, God actually repents, halts, and changes. In this view, the future is genuinely open to God, making him contingent upon us. All right, now open theists redefine omniscience to mean that God knows only what can be known. They argue that the future, including the free choices of humans, cannot be known, and therefore God cannot know. According to this approach, God cannot control the future because doing so would jeopardize the autonomy and dignity of human persons. Okay, back to me. So according to open theists, God only knows what can be known, which makes it entirely possible or even likely that God temporarily forgot Noah. But as many of you know, even from our short time together here, I struggle with the idea of an eternal, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, and holy God being completely helpless based on human decisions. It feels logically incoherent to me. To illustrate, it's like asking someone, how tall is the number 5? The question itself makes no sense. And similarly, it doesn't make sense to put limits on an unlimited being. Moving on in our research, I came across an interesting perspective from the Covenant Keepers website, which specifically addresses Genesis 8:1. The article states, and I quote, "This reference is simply anthropomorphic," there's that word again, "language that attributes human terminology to God. The idea of being remembered means that God turned his active attention to addressing how he was going to deal with this renewed earth and his willingness to personally respond to Noah and his needs. The usage of God remembering someone is found 4 times in Genesis and is used to give the reader the understanding that God has kept a person in mind for special attention and consideration." End of quote. That explanation aligns well with what we found in the Big Book of Bible Difficulties. Now let's delve further into our research. As we've discussed before on this podcast, understanding ancient Hebrew can provide us with a clearer perspective. In an article from Answers in Genesis titled, "Did God Forget About Noah?" we find this explanation, and I quote, "The notion some people might have about God forgetting about Noah comes from a misunderstanding of Genesis 8:1, which states, 'Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark.' Since God remembered Noah, then he must have forgotten about him, right? Not at all. Even in English, remember does not necessarily refer to bringing something to mind that had been forgotten. It can also apply to something that has been kept in mind, like a birthday card that says, 'Remembering you on your special day.' The Hebrew word zakar can have similar connotations." Close quote. All right, the article continues. "The Bible frequently speaks of God remembering his people. God remembered Abraham, Genesis 19:29, Rachel, Genesis 30:22, and Hannah, 1 Samuel 1:19. Before freeing the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt, the Lord remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob, Exodus 2:24. Also, many Old Testament figures prayed that God would remember them, such as Samson, Judges 16:28, David, Psalm 25:7, and Hezekiah, 2 Kings 23. Great comfort can be drawn from these truths. The Lord focused his attention on Noah during the flood." Close quote. So, in this research, we come across the Hebrew word zakar. Interestingly, this is the first time zakar is mentioned in Scripture. When used as a verb, like in this passage, zakar means to remember. But in Hebrew, remembering isn't just a cognitive act. It implies taking action based on that memory. You remember and take it to heart. You take action. And that's exactly what God did here with Noah. Let's bring our research to an end today with a bit more insight into the active verb usage of the Hebrew word zakar, meaning doing what you remember. According to an article titled "Remember" on the Inspired Fountain website, it says, and I quote, "Remembering in the Bible is different. Jewish culture treats remembering as a behavioral response, just as hearing and obeying are synonymous. Some 235 plus times remember is mentioned. In the Hebrew, it literally means to properly mark so as to recognize." Close quote. Continuing on in the article, the first mention is found in the story of Noah. God puts Noah, his family, and the animals in a big boat. While outside the rains are in a downpour, the waters rise, and the boat stays afloat for many days. But God remembered Noah and all, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. And again, this is Genesis 8:1. God remembered. Did he temporarily forget? No. The omniscient God, which means all-knowing, does not forget. His plan was implemented, and in the process, he remembers, he rescues, and he acts. God marked Noah. Close quote. This emphasizes that God's remembering is about taking action. When God remembers, he is actively fulfilling his promises and plans. So, to conclude, it's clear to me that God did not temporarily forget Noah. I'm skeptical that attributing anthropomorphic language offers the best explanation, and I find the open theist interpretation lacking accuracy. Both the insights from the Big Book of Bible Difficulties and the research we've explored here indicate that God did not forget. Rather, he was actively fulfilling what he remembered and promised to Noah. The Hebrew verb usage of zakar clearly illustrates this point. God did exactly what he said he would do for Noah, as this verse now clearly demonstrates based on our research and study. In our next episode, we'll delve into Genesis 8:21. Did God change his mind about never destroying the world again, as 2 Peter 3:10 seems to suggest? Join us as we explore this intriguing question. You may reach us at our website, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com, or you may reach out to me directly at our email address, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com, with any questions, comments, concerns, fits of righteous indignation, or just to say hi. Also, please like and subscribe to this podcast. Tell a friend or two as well. And also write a review and give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, Podbean, Spotify, or any of your podcast venues of choice. It really does help get the word out about the most amazing book ever written. Again, I'm Lance Smith. Until next time, I wish you good luck, good health, and God bless. So long, everybody.